Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. I assume some of you in the room are musicians. So, as musicians, what do you make decisions about? And more importantly, how do you make them? These two questions have been the things that have been occupying my thinking for a number of years. Given I spent most of my career either working with or teaching musicians, I have some insight into what musicians make decisions about, which I want to share with you today. However, despite over 20 years of advising all types of musicians, the processes they use to make decisions, I'm still very unclear on. I think so, a lot of the musicians are as well. My current research aims to go somewhere to addressing that, and I want to outline that later. A sort of caveat is I've changed. I'm not going to do the advertised thing in the abstract, which was do results of a pilot study. I decided when I was putting the presentation together it was a bit premature, so I'm just going to outline up to the study, and then you can ask me about it later if you want. So first I want to establish the sort of the research need and educational need to better understand how and why and what how musicians make project and career decisions. And so I'll start with the frustration that sort of drove me to this research, which is the current quality of career advice for musicians. From informal conversations with each other, family and friends, the thing I'm not really going to cover today, but ranging from books, blogs, social media to conferences, industry bodies, and as part of courses delivered at the institutions that we work for, there's already a lot of advice for musicians, all to varying degrees of legitimacy and quality. Yet very often the advice boiled down to, these maxims: work hard and believe in yourself. Other ones I sort of like, and I have to admit to having said as well, are it doesn't matter unless you have great songs. Or my recent favourite, the only real measure is ticket sales. Maxims usually suffice because career advice is difficult in an industry where nobody really knows, and in most cases previous experience is no predictor of future success. The notions of hard work supported by research on deliberate practice by the likes of Ericsson and Newport, and the array of research from in particular sports and psychology that confidence improves performance, means work hard and believe yourself is pretty irrefutable advice. Despite its lack of insight, it's also, hard work and self-belief are also two criteria that A&Rs in the record industry apply in the judgment of potential signings. However, if it were that simple, then over 1,000 people would not have ignored one of the world's most revered violinists, Joshua Bell, as he busked as part of an experiment in a Washington DC subway station a few years ago. So this is one of the world's most revered musicians being completely ignored in Washington DC rush hour. And so if audience attention is dependent on context, how valuable is advice like work hard and believe in yourself? In many ways, Bell's social experiment encapsulates the difficulty of career development for musicians and advising them on it. This is because the music industry is concerned with the messy business of moving ideas, of capturing and commodifying attention. Even when the record industry moved boxes, the defining logic of its operation was the management of risk in the face of market uncertainty, as the foundational popular music scholarship by the likes of Frith and Negus illustrated. Now with boxes replaced with data packets, the digitized record industry is as opaque as ever, with the dark art of stream and playlist inclusion, royalty payments, and taste profiling all demanding scrutiny. In addition, despite the formalisation of practice advocated by an ever-increasing number of trade bodies and associations, the music business remains substantially unprofessionalised. Its large informal workspace and economy has always had low barriers to entry, making competition fierce, that in turn seems to continually raise the bar for success. And Alex quoted us talking about the 1780s, but you would only, if you replaced sort of trades with business person or entrepreneur, you could be as much talking about today. The ever-present challenges emanate from the fact that no one asks a musician to become a musician, although several people ask me not to be one. So fortunately for me, my calling was to music and not musicianship. But seriously, for the majority of musicians, the music industry is certainly far more adept at commodifying their calling than they are. As Balmore and Bowen, not easy to say, observed 50 years ago, we've relied heavily on the willingness of the performer to perform, no matter what it costs him. And as a recent research by Gross and Musgrave has illuminated, the precarity of a music career has mental health and well-being costs as well as economic ones. So other than a calling to it, why should musicians expect a career? If so, what kind of careers should musicians expect? Even musicians who don't want or expect careers, at the very least, will aspire to make the most of their willingness to perform. Therefore, as with all aspiration, there is risk. And even more so within the social system that Lashinori argued has moved away from a distribution of goods to a distribution of bads, of hazards and risks. As Mathew has illustrated, risk management is a complicated continuum that depends on the amount of randomness in the system. It is further complicated for musicians by an increasingly opaque definition of success in platform-dominated markets. The limited research on musicians' risk to date also illustrates their lack of strategic thinking about it, and the implication is that musicians have at best a reluctance and at worst an ignorance for the very need to manage risk. So perhaps work hard and believe yourself is exactly what musicians want to hear. Yet project and career advice is big business. This November sees the BBC deliver a 3-day industry career event. However, like most industry conferences, the format delivers mainly retrospective narratives like the Journey Theatre. And therefore, these approaches suffer from what decision theorists have identified as hindsight bias, to retrospectively view things as inevitable, or resulting as Duke's quote outlines. Yet this approach should be a little surprise to the semiologists amongst us. As Barthes observed, the very principle of myth is to transform history into nature. These conferences and events represent, replicate and reflect the wider music industry's general approach to training and development. The music industry doesn't just manage narratives, it manages through them, in maxims, stories, heuristics. To survive and thrive, musicians have to decipher the numerous, often conflicting rules of thumb and figure out how and when to apply them. In addition, numerous digital platforms offer up a host of advice in attempting to substitute the product manager role at a record label. Despite the career in one place sales rhetoric, what these digital interfaces offer are a checklist of project management how-to guides. While some of the advice is both good and useful, what they cannot replace is the key product management function of devising strategy, specific to the circumstances of the musician or band. Therefore, other than through the guidance of music industry professionals, how to make musicians think strategically is generally where these universities have come in. Have we done the strategy now? Yes, right. So, the look at, you have your career in one place through a platform and run out the definition of a strategy. In criticising the oversupply created by popular music education compared to available work for musicians, Clunan has suggested perhaps the best popular music studies courses can do is to instill transferable skills and to ensure that students who aspire to careers in the music industries have as much interaction as possible with their local music industries. To this end, for the last 20 years, numerous unis and colleges courses have delivered career development in terms of project management, self-employment, and developing portfolio careers. Recent research has proposed that adapting lean startup approaches from the tech industries. As Guy Morrow has recently proposed, managing careers within the music industries is an extremely uncertain process. The experimentation enabled by agile management addresses this uncertainty. As an advocate of elements of this approach in my own teaching, undoubtedly methods can be adapted from a lean approach, as much of what happens in the music industry is iterative. However, the underpinning logic works better for industry practitioners than it does musicians, because most musicians don't bake for business-savvy entrepreneurs. Moreover, as communion-signed artist and Liverpool graduate Dancecult stated when returning to deliver a masterclass, once it's out, it's out. Meaning, unlike in tech where companies improve products by continually releasing updated versions, in music, when first impressions are so hard to make and matter so much, the process is only iterative up to the point of the release of the recording of the video. Despite the breadth and depth of approaches to advice, thus resulting in hindsight bias, identify process and success and turn mythologies into history, and mythologises history into nature, maxims and heuristics continue to prevail as career advice in the music industry. Moreover, digitisation has changed the meaning of success and afforded musicians the opportunity and autonomy, but in doing so has rendered them enforced entrepreneurs. Musicians who primarily want to be bands, not businesses, now have to think strategically about their projects and possibly careers. To do this, firstly, musicians need to understand the levels of complexity they face. So, this is my first model of complexity. It's a straightforward summation of the music industry's best configuration. And both he and many other scholars have previously outlined various perspectives. This production pyramid configuration is my response to Cluman and Williamson's call to view the music industries as the lived experience of the majority of musicians and operators, from the perspective as musicians as labourers within the network. In attempts to define the systems that shape musicians and how they in turn reshape the system, each triangle is a field that operates on its own logics, consistent with Bourdieu's conceptual triad. But then each field extends its reach and overlaps with the other areas. The cultural base of the pyramid is founded on Wernick's argument that the expanded role of promotion has led to the absorption of Marx's economic basis and cultural superstructure into each other. The 5 C's then represent the core long-standing social and legal constructs that change slowly and dictate the parameters of music making. I employ Csikszentmihalyi's approach to creativity and collaboration, recognised as Henry has, is the community and not the individual that makes creativity manifest. The remaining 3 C's are essentially the consequences of any form of creative collaboration intended for market. Commerce, the exchange of value, is underpinned by contracts, both those with collaborators and those related to the copyright ownership and licensing of rights. Likewise, employing Stern's definition of a medium as the social basis that allows a set of technologies to stand out as a unified thing with clearly defined functions, the foundational C's, with maybe broadening copyright to all IPR, also generally dictate the development of technologies that drive the change in the music industry. I employ music industries in 2 ways. First, Williamson and Cluman's rethinking of 3 interrelated but distinct primary music industries, live, publishing and records, that all adhere to their own interests and activities centred on music. And secondly, the music industry, in Jones's conception of it, as a system of practices, as a process, not a place. The music industry process is entirely codependent on the media, which I broadly define as mass and social media, and include the platform capitalism that Cerncheck and Langley and Leishan have recently discussed. Platforms highlight the consumer sovereignty the audience exerts over the production pyramid, whilst the level of audience interaction and influence remains a hotly debated topic. See the likes of Noah and people like that for that. My approach is consistent with the work of Hearn, who adapts Raymond Williams' structures of feeling concept to social media, which is one way audience participation then re-exerts influence over the cultural base. These triangular networks also encode and decode unending multitude of signs, signifiers and signifiers contained within music symbolic goods. Produced. In navigating these complex structures, in an attempt to what Stuart Hall has defined within the consent of the audience, on a project-by-project basis, musicians assume one of what Hesmondale would call functions, meaning this could be one musician, all of them, or it could be 25 or 30, as Anthony just illustrated with Sgt. Pepper's before. Building on the theories of cultural industries and semiotics, primarily the likes of Hall, Keith, Wernick, Barth, Berger and Hesmondale, I would define symbolic goods as transformative product that seeks to mine through self-promotion and acquires value through the relevance and significance of repeated use. In turn, each symbol contains 3 core texts, a sound, a story and an image that continually transforms its initial music ideas through project collaboration into products. Only a product, even a partial one, can enter the various value-added markets by seeking the consent of the audience or industry. As Bell's experience illustrated, the coding is context-dependent, and so decisions about where to place symbols are as significant as the decisions about their creation. To move musical ideas, then, musicians form projects to turn music into products to enter markets. I'm not going to labour this point. The slide is designed to illustrate what Tegan Swift had recognised as the uniqueness of many musicians' individual profiles, and the shared complexity in the music professions. The three core music industries outlined in the pyramid and the media segments from open up into 11 markets musicians may have to engage in, depending on their function with any given project. These markets include social media, what I've labelled as playlists, which is radio, TV, streaming, coverage, blogs, and print media. Brands and media, like Leslie Knight has recently written on. Funding, that Olivia Gable's PhD research is currently on. And then it sort of talks about how all of the symbolic goods, when they're used, turn into outputs and turn use value into exchange value. Given the dizzying complexity of structures, projects and markets, is it any wonder, despite years of teaching professional development to musicians and much of my frustration, I still receive emails like this. The challenge, it seems to me, for us as educators, is to teach musicians to teach themselves by giving them a toolkit to work with. As you might have gathered, I'm partial to a model. So my response to a combination of experience and theory was to develop this. Primarily based on the work of creative industries author and advisor Dave Parrish, I wanted to reverse musicians' thinking. Did that work? Yeah. Oh. Represented the email to make them think about, before publishing a work, who is the market, what is the message, and how do I best connect them. To enable musicians to do this, they need to be able to orientate themselves by understanding what type of decision they are making and the key considerations of that type of decision. Therefore, I divided this 5 R's model that for me contains the key areas musicians make decisions about. There's a host of theory that underpins each R, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to briefly outline the process. First is repertoire. This is the stage where musicians, based on the value judgments Frith alluded to, make creative and collaborative decisions around symbolic creation that have commercial, copyright and contractual consequences are identified. Next is response. The basis for this stage is the notion that competition in the music industries is primarily a competition for responses for attention. This is where musicians decide which markets will add symbolic value to their repertoire, what value needs adding, and when is the optimum time to add it. Effectively, why do they need the response from the next? Who do they need the response from next? And what type of response do they need? And whilst framing it in this way is an attempt to instill a market message medium approach to musicians, I recognise the fluidity between this and the next stage. The representation stage considers who, where and how a symbolic good is represented to the identified markets to attain the desired response. This stage may be dominated by cultural intermediaries acting as representatives on behalf of musicians. Reputation then measures the ongoing process of representation and the significance and relevance acquired by the symbolic good across the markets entered. Online metrics serve as one measure of symbolic value, but reputation is more robustly reflected in the quality of contracts musicians are offered and negotiate and sign. And finally, getting paid, remuneration, where the project's symbolic value equates with economic value, the use value becomes exchange value. In turn, being paid facilitates the possibility of future projects. This model seems to make sense to the musicians I've talked to, although not necessarily described as a 5 R's model. But what remains unclear to me is the decision processes that underpin each of these 5 stages and what on a day-to-day basis actually occupies musicians' thinking. To go some way to addressing this, what I'm looking at is to answer these types of questions. And this is what I piloted with the model, which just felt the results were a bit too premature to present. To do that, the next phase of my research is a national survey of UK musicians that have already has the support of the MU. So, as most research on musicians' decision making to date is either biographical or ethnographic, see the seminal work of Cohen and Finnegan and some of the presentations we've seen today already, and by definition retrospective, my approach is influenced by Csikszentmihalyi's experience sampling method, but has been adapted so it delivers an initial one-off hopefully big data sample. Designed to minimise the impact of what Taleb has termed the narrative fallacy, which addresses our limited ability to look at sequences of facts without weaving an explanation into them. The 10-minute survey asks each musician about various aspects of their most recent, most important career decision, which they do not yet know the outcome of. The purpose is to explore if taking the quantitative approach garners different insights to the previously predominant narrative-based research. The data will test. Sorry. Stop. Stop. Thanks. The data will test the validity of the 5R model and explore the established themes and patterns in many different types of musicians deal with. Similar and different types of decisions. And if it's a complete disaster, I'll just go back to telling musicians to work hard and believe in themselves. So, in a way, this is more a call than a conclusion. So if you're a musician or know someone, which I'm sure you all do, this is a shameless sort of pitch to help you get the survey out to as many people, and different musicians as possible. So hopefully come and see me after in the bar or whatever. I'd be happy to talk. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Any questions?
Tim.
So I assume that there's twofold. You're trying to figure out how musicians make better decisions, but the model you gave is a prescriptive model, isn't it? It's not a descriptive model.
Yeah.
Okay, so how successful is that? You said, you know, you give up after a while, but do you find that students actually respond to that model?
I haven't given them, said, here's a model, go apply it. But in my teaching, particularly in level with musicians, I've used it to help them orientate themselves when they're making decisions. The thing that I'm interested in is what they go away and think about when I'm not talking to them, I suppose, and how they arrive at those decisions about those things. And whether it's in collaboration with managers, each other, the environments that they make decisions in, what times of the day they make them, all those types of things that you're not privy to unless you're actually in the room with them.
Right, I mean, because well, there's a lot, we can talk about this over beers, and we will. But one of the things that I found that's so interesting about it is that my students want a prescriptive model, like you said, and that ability, if you can give something that actually is both prescriptive and descriptive for them, then they sort of get it. Like, for me, I use the Hull's free income model. And they actually, I was like, can you place yourself in there? And they go, yeah, that's where I fit within this income chain.
Yeah.
But I'm not certain beforehand that they have any idea where they fit. And so, like, you're giving them a narrative.
Yeah. I suppose what I'm interested in from the research is, without giving them the narrative, what occupies musicians thinking. One of the concerns, I never mentioned it in this, is from teaching lots of musicians over the last 15 years, they seem to be as obsessed with social media, if not more so, than writing songs. And so one of my concerns is that they're rushing to market too early because they feel that they're compelled to. And so I want to know what's occupying their thinking, I suppose.
Takeshi 6ix9ine. I mean, you guys know Takeshi 6ix9ine. He's making $250,000 in Instagram posts. Yeah. I'd be motivated by that too.
Yes. But it's not everybody, is it? And also the catalyst is normally the music, you know. Dua Lipa's just, I think signed a couple of just sub-1 million pound deals for various appearances, but without new rules, that doesn't happen.
I was just wondering with your charts which you put on the screen.
Which one?
Well, pretty much all of them.
Yeah.
Because what gets me is, like, I'm not sure if you're looking at this or it's something which comes under, other things, is image.
Yeah.
Is image and also message within image or within music. So, yeah.
So, I mean, obviously, don't get me wrong, it's not as linear as it looks here. There's obviously fluidity in it. Most musicians are making music with some idea of the market that they're already in, because of genre conventions and all those types of things. And very often they're thinking about representation by just being themselves. They're part of the symbolic good, aren't they? So it's it's not as linear as it's presented here. And it's one of the things, the fluidity of it is one of the things I'm interested in. Well, as a basic example, get a set list together, book a gig, do a gig, get applause, get paid. The best analogy you can have. And that pretty much maps to pretty much my experience, any sort of process you can do that to, because it's obviously much more fluid than that can be.
Where does getting a manager fit in?
Representatives. I think one of the key decisions musicians make is who represents them. Yeah, because again, they're hiring the manager, not the other way around. Although much of what goes on would make you think it was the other way around. But they're making the decision to hire a manager. That's a management decision. Hire PRs, any decision. Maybe they may be absolving themselves of that decision to more experienced people in the industry. That's a representation issue. It was 10 hours at one point. That's it. Yeah.
Another question of where something fits. So you're kind of talking about response, representation, repetition, and so on. But where does regulation fits in? So you mentioned copyrights on the left.
Yeah.
But do you include in the model also the musicians become self-aware in a way of the rights and possibilities within the existing legal framework?
Yeah, so in some ways, right from here, as soon as they're in creative collaboration with each other, there's these things in play, whether they realise it or not. Yeah? And so educating them to make sure that they realise it is one of the sort of, I suppose, the key things. But as soon as they go into a room to write songs with each other, that's being created. Yeah? That has commercial and contractual consequences then and certainly in the future. And one of the key issues of the industry has been musicians' ignorance to those consequences early on in their careers. I was in the panel this morning on Squeeze, and the first paper was all about how they've been screwed by the industry for 35 years, because when they made these initial decisions, they were aware of the consequences of those decisions in the contracts that they signed. Then it plays out, obviously, it's a market issue. If you take a production and culture perspective, then as soon as you get to markets, there's a whole host of other things going on.
Just going to take one more question.
It's a question about your question there.
Yeah.
Can you kind of just skip back to it for a second? Prompt. Don't you think that box is going to be really impossible to analyse? If you're getting hundreds of, if not thousands of responses that are open-ended, tell me in 3 sentences about some problem you've had with some of the decisions that you've made.
Yeah.
How are you going to analyse that?
Well, in a way, what I want to do is feed it into the bucket, the 5 large buckets. So codified decision is either a repertoire decision, a representation decision, a response decision. That's how I'm going to code it initially.
But how are you actually physically going to do that when these are kind of open-ended?
The rest of it isn't. The rest is pretty tick boxy. This is only the first sort of page, and so it's about so really what I'm asking here is what type of decision have you made, and how does it fit in the model, and then whether the processes that underpin that decision are similar or different depending on the type of decision is, or depending on the level of experience, professionalism of the musician, and how they make it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm happy to do more detail with you later.
That's all right.
Yeah.
The University of Huddersfield, inspiring tomorrow's professionals.